and welcome to my channel. If you're new to my channel, my name is Ilya. I make videos about music as well as my experiences living in the United Kingdom. In this video, I'll be sharing my reasons for moving to Scotland as well as my experiences and views on various aspects of living in Scotland. If you watched my previous video on how I finally got my first job in the UK, you would have noticed that I used to live in England. So about 2 years plus of living in England, we started considering moving to Scotland, and the idea came actually from my husband's work. At first we were skeptical, of course, because we didn't really know much about Scotland, but and also I was particularly worried because I had just started finding my feet in England and I was worried that I might have to start all over again in Scotland. But we still decided to keep an open mind, and then we decided to make a pros and cons list of living in England versus living in Scotland. So one of the areas we considered in our list was housing. Now, as soon as I realized that with the same amount we're paying for a one-bedroom flat in Greater London is like the outskirts of London. So with the same amount we're paying for a one-bedroom flat, we could get a 3-bedroom house in Scotland at a location which is about 15 minutes from Edinburgh and 30 minutes from the heart of Glasgow. I became really interested and decided to come up to Scotland on a Friday and experience as well as check out what the country looks like. We stayed in an area which was not too far from where my husband would be working because I would have to look for a job, and we very much liked the area. The people we met were really warm, and the places we checked out in terms of renting were looking really positive. So we made our choice. We decided that we're going to move to this country. We have now lived in Scotland for a total of 5 years plus, coming up to 6 years in March. So on to my experiences and my views on various aspects of living in Scotland. The first thing I would like to talk about is food. I am very particular about my food, and I know that I would not move to a country where I can't find my African food. So with regards to access to African food, initially I used to go to Glasgow because I also had things to do in Glasgow. So once I was done with what I go there to do on weekends, we would go into the shop and buy some African food. However, I never saw a shop that was owned by an African. It was always the Asian shops. One of the shops is really well stocked with every single African food I could think of. In fact, there was a time when I saw kilishi, and I believe I actually even saw suya, but of course I didn't buy any of those. But the shop is really well stocked. Unfortunately, the food were not really fresh. Most times you come there, the plantains are overripe, the yams are probably almost kind of rotten, and every other thing was just not fresh. And the other shop had really fresh food, so their plantains were always fresh, their yams were fresh, their potatoes and every other thing fresh. But then I couldn't buy a lot of other things like gari and things like that from the shop. So I started looking to find somewhere else I could buy everything at the point where they are still fresh. Recently I found actually 2 shops now in Edinburgh that are owned by Africans. One of the shops is actually owned by a Nigerian, and the name of the shop is I think an Edo name. So it's owned by a Nigerian, and they stock everything I need, and it's always fresh. And then recently I found another one. I'm not sure if they're owned by Nigerians, but definitely owned by Africans. Their food is also fresh. So in terms of finding African food, that is pretty much covered. In Scotland, the roughness of an area is determined by what is called a Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. Usually you will hear people say SIMD or SIMD Index. And this is typically ranked from 1 to 10, with 1 being the most deprived area and 10 being the most affluent. Now, if you're a new immigrant, It might not be very obvious, especially if you go to the smaller towns. It might not be very obvious, but if you really pay attention, you begin to notice. In big cities, it can be quite obvious, and you can see that the areas are rough. Naturally, the houses in the higher CIMD index would be more expensive compared to the ones in the lower CIMD index, even if you're looking for the exact spec of house. One good thing though, which I really like about Scotland, is that all towns, or nearly all towns, have got areas with a higher index and areas with a lower index. So there is really no need for everyone to crowd up in a particular town. So within a town you want to live in, you can find whatever index you're able to afford to live in. Houses are also modestly priced, even for the ones in the higher index area. A 3-bedroom house, which is in a higher index area and about 15 minutes away from Edinburgh and maybe about 30 minutes away from Glasgow, you might be looking to pay £220,000 upwards for such a house, and you can expect to have maybe a driveway and a back garden, 3 toilets and 2 bathrooms, and perhaps one of the master bedroom would have an ensuite. Unless you live in a major city like Edinburgh or Glasgow, you would find that you would need a car to get around easily. Taking the train from small towns into the city is relatively okay, but sometimes you might find that you might have just one train within an hour, and the bus is a complete no for small towns. I used to walk about 25 minutes walk away from my house, and the few times I tried to take the bus, it ended up taking me more than 1 hour to get to work. I abandoned that option. Most of the times the bus might run late, or sometimes it wouldn't even just show up. Before I got my driver's license, I registered at a dental practice, which was about 40 minutes away from my house, because that was the only place that was accepting patients. The only way to get to the dental practice by bus was to take 2 buses and then also walk an additional 30 minutes. It was pointless getting the bus. Education is completely free in Scotland, and this also includes books for early years to secondary school. Even the university education is tuition free. This one really surprised me. The schools are generally well equipped, and the class sizes for secondary school is typically 20 for practical subjects like music and CDT, and 30 for non-practical subjects like English, math, and the rest of it. One main difference which I found between the system here and what we've got in Nigeria is that the students don't typically take exams as we know it back home. So say for example, the secondary school students, they don't really take exams until they're in senior phase. There are 3 exams which they could take, which is the nationals. They've got national 3, 4 and 5, and then they could take higher and then also advanced higher. Even though I do not belong to any social groups as per se, there are various groups an immigrant could choose to belong to, especially if you're part of an organized religion. You could easily meet people there. I met an African on the train, and they were telling me about some group of Nigerians living in the area where I lived. I never really pursued it because I was quite busy. There are significantly less Africans in smaller towns, and even in the main cities, Edinburgh and Glasgow, there are significantly fewer Africans compared to maybe say like London or even Manchester, for example. However, in the small towns, there are still quite some Africans here and there, and there are a lot of Polish people as well. That's one other thing I noticed. I saw in a newspaper which said that the Polish are the largest group of immigrants in Scotland, and they have made this place their home as well and contributes a lot to the society. So yes, you'll come across a lot of people from Polish background. So generally, people are really warm and friendly, and the hill makes for very beautiful scenery, and compared to London, it feels like one is breathing fresh air. Both Glasgow and Edinburgh are very much accessible from so many little towns. You could drive into very little quiet towns from the bustling city within 30 minutes. Overall, having moved to Scotland, I find that my quality of life has greatly improved, I mean, the air is cleaner, the houses are affordable. I have a much shorter commute to work thanks to the fact that things are close by. And finally, the people are generally warm and friendly. Thank you for watching. I hope you find this both entertaining and helpful, especially if you're ever considering moving to a different part of the UK.